When it comes to cribbage strategy, there's discarding strategy, which two cards to give to either your crib hand or your opponent's crib hand, and then there's strategy for the playing phase of the game, playing out the 4 cards remaining in your hand. Personally, I've always been more focused on the discarding side of things, maximizing my total hand points and crib points, rather than focusing on what the pegging potential of my hand might be. Unless it's the end of the game and the fate of the game rests on just a few points, then I'm definitely more concerned with pegging points. But recently I've been thinking about the playing phase, and I started working on something that I got far enough along where I thought I would share some of it. So this video is about pegging points in the playing phase, and my attempt to answer the question of whether certain hands are better for pegging points than others. I wrote a program to try to help answer this question, and later on in the video I'll show my program in action with some results and summarize some conclusions that can be drawn from those results. The first thing I wanted to do was figure out how many hands there are, not 6-card hands. I've actually done that calculation in a previous video, but I wanted to know how many 4-card hands are possible, because after the discard, we're left holding 4 cards to play out, like this example. And with these 4 cards, because there are no flush points during the playing phase, suits don't matter during this part of the game, so only rank matters, ace, 2, 3, and so on. So the first question answer was, how many unsuited 4-card hands are there? Here are the calculations for determining that. In this table, and there's a lot to digest here, so I'll explain it. I've broken out the different hand types that can be found within a 4-card hand, and the number of combinations for each hand type. The first hand type would be 4 cards all of one rank, so 4 aces or 4 twos, etc. The calculation for this is n choose k, or 13 choose 1. There are 13 ranks, ace, 2, 3, and so on. That's the number of objects in our set, our n value, and our k value, the number of objects we want from that set, is 1. This means 13 factorial divided by 1 factorial times 12 factorial, which equals 13. Next hand type is 3 of one rank and 1 of another. So for example, 3 aces and a 2. There are 156 combinations of this type of hand. And so on. All of the different combinations are added up, and that gives us 1,820 different unsuited 4-card hands. 4 aces all the way to 4 kings. So knowing how many 4-card hands are possible, this will come into play later on. For now, I'll move on to my program. In my program, I put 2 random 4-card hands against each other to simulate 2 people playing their cards out. The 4 cards for the non-dealer's hand are chosen randomly from a virtual deck of 52 cards, and the 4 cards for the dealer's hand are chosen from the remaining 48 cards to ensure no cards are ever duplicated. The order of the cards is random. I didn't numerically reorder the hands. We have our non-dealer hand. We have our dealer hand. Cards are played out just like they would be in a real game in alternating sequence. Non-dealer plays first, then dealer, non-dealer, and so on. All standard cribbage scoring and playing rules apply. 15s, pairs, 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, runs, 31s, goes, and last card. Let's look at one simulation of the cards being played out. The non-dealer's first card is played, and the dealer's first card. At this point, I'll pause to note something, and that is I didn't write any cribbage strategy into my program. I just had the cards played out in order, with the standard cribbage rule still applying, for example, that the play couldn't go past 31. I did consider introducing some basic strategy into my program, like for example, the non-dealer should never lead a 5, or in this scenario, the dealer probably wouldn't play the 2, because if the non-dealer had a 3, they could score a run. But adding in strategy felt like a slippery slope, because if I added one rule, then that might lead to adding another rule and so on. So I decided against introducing any strategy whatsoever, because I didn't want to have my own personal tendencies influence the data. I wanted the simulations to be completely random, because my theory was that with enough simulations and a large enough set of resulting data, we would be able to see the best pegging hands naturally and consistently rise to the top. In this scenario, the play continues. The dealer reaches 31 and scores 2 points. Play resumes with the non-dealer leading their final card and the dealer playing their final card, turn a point for last card. So in this simulation, the dealer earns a total of 3 pegging points. This is one simulation. My program looped 500,000 of these, each time with 2 random hands, and calculating the pegging points scored for both non-dealer and dealer. Let's talk about the loop sequence. 2 hands are generated, a non-dealer hand and a dealer hand. The playing phase is simulated. All pegging points are calculated, and the results of each hand are exported to a data table. The virtual deck is reshuffled, and the cards randomized, and then the loop begins again. So 500,000 loops equals 500,000 rounds of cribbage, with one non-dealer hand and one dealer hand per round. That's 500,000 rounds times 2 hands, which is 1 million hands. After the results are exported, there's some additional calculations, and I'll show those in a little bit. Now that I've explained my program, I'll show the program in action. I've set my program to loop 5,000 rounds. I could set it to 10,000 or 100,000 or 500,000, which I've done, but that would take a few minutes to process, and 5,000 is much quicker for the purposes of this video. So I'll start the program now. And in just a few short moments, I'll have a list of 10,000 hands randomly generated and the pegging points earned by each hand. So here's the list of 10,000 hands, all random. So the data shows if the hand is a dealer hand or a non-dealer hand, the 4 cards, the hand, the number of pegging points, and the margin. There's a few calculations that I can do. I've pre-populated some formulas. The first calculation is to calculate the average pegging points across all non-dealer hands. So I'll just add the equal sign in here, and presto. So the average pegging points for all non-dealer hands is 1.59. And I can do the same for dealer. Again, quickly add in the equal sign. And the value is 2.61. So 2.61 is the average pegging points scored by all dealer hands. And the ratio of non-dealer to dealer points is 60.67%. So what this says is, on average, the non-dealer will score 60% of the points that the dealer will score. From here, I can go to my list of 1,820 hands. So here's the list, all of the different 4-card hands from 4 aces to 4 kings, all in numerical order. And using simple formulas, I can calculate quickly the count, so the number of times each of these hands appeared in the simulations, and I can calculate the average number of points across all the instances that appeared for each hand. So I'll simply complete the formulas. And quickly fill down, and the values will populate. Let's look at one example. So in this example, hand 116, and the hand is ace 2 4 5. This hand appeared 12 times in the simulations out of 10,000 random hands, and across those 12 times, the average pegging points was 3.92. The margin was 2.08. So when the 2 random hands were pitted against each other, this value is the number of points difference. And the rank of this hand among all 1,820 hands is 85, so rather high. So lastly, let's look at the results and some conclusions that can be drawn from the simulations of 500,000 rounds, or 1 million hands. Here I'm showing 2 tables, the top ranked 25 hands and the bottom 25 ranked hands. Again, 1 million hands were simulated. So in these tables, you can see rank, the hand, the average points for each hand, and the count. So the count is the number of times this hand appeared in the simulations. So we can immediately observe a few things. First, the top 25 hands seem to have more lower value cards than the bottom 25 hands do. So this tells us that lower ranked cards tend to peg better than higher cards, and I think this seems fairly obvious. The next thing we can observe is that in the bottom 25 hands, there seem to be a number of hands that contain three of a kind, a high-ranked three of a kind. So perhaps hands with these types of three of a kinds aren't that great for pegging points. And I think this is fairly obvious as well. We can see 7, Jack, 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 7, Queen, 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 2, 6, 6, 6, and so on. Averaging my data, the average pegging points for dealer across 1 million hands is 2.6 points per hand, and for non-dealer, 1.6 points. So the non-dealer seems to peg around 60% of the points that the dealer does. The reason I point this out is that when I did some research around pegging points, I found a website that also suggested a 60% ratio. So my results seem to align with that, which reassures me that my data is fairly accurate. I'll put a link to that website in the description. In these simulations, all of the hands are random. And since there's no strategy written into my program, all hands are scoring points accidentally. In a real game scenario, points are scored more purposefully. The idea behind my simulations is to simulate random hands enough times, hundreds of thousands of times, so that the average values become more accurate and that any outliers are removed. With a big enough sample size, the more precise the mean is and the more reliable the results are. If I simulate enough randomness, patterns will emerge and the good pegging hands will rise to the top. One of the challenges with pegging is that optimal pegging depends on two primary factors, board position and the cards your opponent plays out. You could be dealt the exact same hand twice in a row, but play that hand completely differently depending on your position on the crib board in relation to where your opponent is and what cards your opponent is playing. The results I'm presenting here, while they don't factor in board position, they do consider the cards of the opponent. In my simulations, as we can see here in these tables, some hands occurred over 1,000 different times in the simulations, and in those 1,000 times, more than likely squared up against a different hand each time. And just one fun tidbit about this data, 500,000 rounds equals approximately 50,000 games, 10 rounds per game. If you were to play 5 games per day, it would take over 27 years to play this many games to produce this amount of pegging data. So that's where using technology like this is really interesting. And I plan to continue doing more things around the playing phase and pegging points. I think that there are some additional calculations that I would like to incorporate and some other things I would like to do. And I plan to share more as I continue down this path. If you like this video, please hit the like button.